following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back. A's baseball, past, present, and future. I'm Ralph Tycho with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and the host is here with a special guest returning to the airwaves. So let me introduce Jerry Feidelberg to introduce our guest. Jerry.
Well, thank you, Ralph. It's a pleasure. Today we have a well-read, well-known sports writer. I believe he lives in the Phoenix, Arizona area, and he writes a column for Forbes magazine. It's on the web almost every day. And I remember him back in 2007 when he covered Barry Bonds and Bonds' attempt to break Henry Aaron's home run record. And the gentleman's name is Barry Bloom. And Barry, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ralph. Thanks, Jerry. It's great to be on.
Great to have you, really. Jerry, in your introduction, you reminded me of how when Boomski was on these airwaves, maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago now, we had a basic disagreement over Barry's proposed selection to the Hall of Fame. And since then, I just wanted to tell you that I totally did a 180 on Barry Bonds and Clemens with your input and the input of Peter Golenbach and others. I realized that the game has changed, that the era that Clemens and Bonds played in, they were certainly far from being the only users, and there is no way that you can tell me now that a high proportion of the players weren't imbibing just as they were. And we just can't compare players from the past to players of the future anymore. We really never could because of a number of factors, the dead ball era, pre-integration, all of that goes into effect. Barry Bonds, Clemens for the Hall of Fame. Thank you for Boomski for converting me, as it were.
Well, yeah, I mean, as you know, I've been pretty consistent on this, voting for Bonds, Clemens, previously McGuire, when they came on the ballot in 2012, 2013. And, we're still in a situation where, those guys are, they're crawling up slowly towards 75%. And, I'm beginning to doubt whether, they will get in. It might be that 50 years from now, kind of like the Negro League Committee under new and enlightened leadership in the Hall, you're going to have somebody put together a steroids era committee that's going to posthumously vote in a lot of these guys when we're all gone. But I don't see that.
I don't think it'll take that long.
I do.
Do you really?
Yeah, I'm beginning to doubt
that.
A
new age of voters, younger voters who have replaced.
It started to top off already.
Oh, really?
They're. I thought that, basically what you're getting now is about 70% of the voters who reveal their ballots early and are public about it are voting for Bonds and Clemens. And then of the people who want anonymity and don't vote, and don't release their ballots, 45% are voting for them. And I think what you have is you've already had the bump from the changeover in the voting populace. And I think there are a lot of people who are going to have a vote for the next 3 years, especially because that's all they're on the ballot, that they're just set in their way about this, and it's just not going to change. Either you're for it or you're against it. There's no way of convincing anybody or converting people to vote. And I think once they get into the the error committees, they have no chance. Absolutely. So, I mean, if they don't get in the next 3 years, and I look at 2021 as being that the year, because next year we have Jeter. The year after 2021, there's nobody of any validity who's going on the ballot for the first time. Not only is there nobody of any validity getting in the first time, there's nobody coming on the ballot who's ever going to get in 2021. And then 2022, we're right back in it with A-Rod and Ortiz in the ballot, and all of this is going to be stirred up all over again. And that's their last year on the ballot. So, this is where we are, and I just don't think they're going to have enough to get to 75%.
Okay.
Well, I hope
Larry,
I hope you're on.
Jerry, first, why don't you give us your opinion of all of this?
I hope he's wrong. We've discussed that the Hall of Fame is a baseball museum, and these two guys, Clemens with 354 wins and Bonds with 762 home runs, are certainly part of baseball history, and for them not to be in as a player is ludicrous. Clemens, I don't believe, ever tested positive for any substance, any performing-enhancing substance. There was controversy about it, but, and that's probably what's keeping him out of the Hall. Bonds, of course, was a little bit different, but, again, I don't think he ever tested positive. He admitted to using the clear and the cream, but he didn't supposedly know what he was getting into. So, in my mind, I think they both should be in the Hall of Fame. And it's a sad thing that they don't get the 75% vote, and that's, the New Era Committee. If they can let in Harold Baines, and Baines was a great player, but he never got, more than 6 or 8% of the vote on the ballots, and he got elected into the Hall of Fame. So there's a lot of controversy about that. And if Harold Baines is in the Hall of Fame, and you're going to keep out Bonds and Clemens, then the Hall of Fame loses credibility. That's just my opinion.
Well, I don't think it's anything new with the Hall of Fame. The history of all Hall of Fame voting back from 1936 on has been, rife with controversy and politics. Who's gotten in, who hasn't gotten in. I mean, Jackie Robinson got in by 4 votes. It's not like what we're Harold Baines. I don't think you should hold the Harold Baines up as an example for anything. First of all, it happened when Reinsdorf and LaRussa were on the 16-man committee, and they were able to coalesce a lot of the people on the committee in a vote where you argue for each of the people that that in a small group, and you present for that person within the small group. That's the way that's done. Unlike the baseball writers vote, which is done in essentially in a vacuum. I mean, there's more discussion about the baseball writers vote now, just because there's hundreds of us who've come out over the years and said, we're going to write columns about this, and we're going to be transparent about it, and we're going to discuss our vote. But you still have at least 50% of the populace who won't come out with that information. Some of them do afterward, but not before. And you've had the Pete Rose situation. You've had Shoeless Joe Jackson situation. I mean, Cy Young didn't get in. The top 5 people who got in. Alexander, Grover Cleveland Alexander got in before Cy Young. Walter Johnson got in before Cy Young. I mean, it's just the way the whole voting goes. It's a subjective, situation. And, I agree with you, Jerry, that I think Bonds and Clemens should be in. But that's not what I'm talking about. I just don't think they're going to get 75% of the vote at this point to get in. Maybe I'm wrong, and I hope I am. And 2021 is going to be the telling year for Bonds, Clemens, and Schilling, for that matter, who all came in the same class in 2013.
Do you think that the writers still feel that the players should have been pure, that they they shouldn't have been tainted with the PED thing. When Pudge Rodriguez got in, there were rumors swirling about him using PEDs, and I'm sure that there are a couple other guys or people in the hall now that have used PEDs, but they didn't get caught. So I think for whatever reason, Bonds and Clemens are being used as the poster boys for the error. And if you go, well, we've got Piazza in there, who is suspected, Bagwell, who is suspected, Pudge Rodriguez, who was suspected. There are other guys in there, like Ricky Henderson. There are people who came off those A's teams when the Bash Boys and all those guys were doing this stuff. I mean, there are a lot of guys, already who are in. Plus, with the committees voting in, Bud, who supervised the whole thing, LaRussa, Torrey, and Cox, who had teams that were rife with it, and they got into the Hall of Fame taking advantage of those guys. I think that's what started to swing a lot of people's opinion to begin with, that if these guys were going to get in, then why are we voting against Bonds and Clemens? But you've got some people like Verducci, and you can go down the list. Guys who are, Jeff Passan, who's not even voting anymore because he doesn't like the way it's going. There are a number of people who are just hardened in it, and they just think they think the whole era stinks. But there's nothing to me that proves that some sort of subjective drugging isn't still going on in this era, because the drug testing really doesn't reveal anything. In the last group of people who were suspended, those were all non-analytic suspensions based on biogenesis. A-Rod, Braun, a whole bunch of those, Yandel, there's a whole 10 of them who didn't fail drug tests. I mean, Andy Pettit never failed a drug test either, but he came up in the Mitchell report, and then he subsequently admitted that he did it, and it's affecting his Hall of Fame voting too. And as a society, we believe in second chances. And if a person did make a mistake and they admit the mistake, should that be held against them for their performance on the field? That there were players who were juicing, and I'm going to use Bobby Estalella and Denard Span as examples of players who were suspected of juicing. Didn't help their careers one iota. They could have juiced all they wanted. They still weren't going to hit more than 235. So,
yeah, well, you have a lot of marginal players who I think choose to get the one contract and then stop doing it. And they went back to the numbers of what they were used to before they might have done it. So yeah, it's a whole era, and I agree, Jerry. It's a situation where we're talking about it's a sport. The Hall of Fame is a museum. You can't represent that era in sports and leave it completely out of the museum. And and I don't think the writers are doing any service. The ones who are not voting these guys in are doing any service. They're just carrying water for Major League Baseball at this point and the Hall that don't want them in. So that's why I'm saying, you go long after I'm gone, you're gone, Dane Forbes Clark is gone, Jeff Idelson, who's leaving in July. I mean, long after this is all over, and you have different.
I'm going to miss you guys.
There. It's like those guys are going to be voted into the Hall of Fame in some special committee. It's going to be done.
Yeah.
Right. If for no other reason, because young people need to come up to the museum. That's what they base their revenue on, and a lot of it is simply that. Let me ask you this, Barry. Is there drugs notwithstanding? Is there anyone in the Hall now that you believe shouldn't be in the Hall? nothing to do with drugs, nothing to do with gambling, and then I will ask you about Pete Rose.
To me, okay, so I've been voting since 1992. The only guy I had trouble with who got into the hole and I didn't vote for was Jim Rice. And I felt the combination of Rice that Rice had, he had 10 really good years in the American League. He wasn't the greatest guy in the world to deal with. During that time, there was no interleague play. I only saw him in postseason. I was in San Diego covering the Padres, and I was doing National League. So my view of him was a little stilted. I didn't see him every day. But I went down to the end, and when he came close in his 15th year, it's the 1 year. I mean, every year I get my ballot, I pretty much know what I'm going to do. And by the time I get it, I look at it. After a few days, I study it, and I check things off, and I put it in the mail, and I write a column about it. Take a picture of it and accompany it with the column. That 1 year, I talked to a lot of people because I just didn't want to be the guy. I think he was like 6 votes short the previous year. And I said, I'm not going to be the guy to keep Jim Rice out. And I talked to a lot of people, and in the end, the consensus was from very important people who I talked to about this, that if you didn't vote for him before, why should you vote for him now? And I didn't vote for him. So if you want to say, do I have a problem with Jim Rice? No. He got voted in by the plurality. Look, this is a democratic society we live in. Everybody, and when I see people online, well, if that's your ballot, you should have your vote revoked, it incenses me. I mean, I don't like all the people who voted the way they voted in the last presidential election, but I'm never going to say that those people should have their vote revoked. It's their right. Everybody who's a baseball writer who has 10 years in consecutively and gets the vote earned that vote. That vote is a right. You worked for that vote. And everybody has a right. If you want to hand in a blank ballot, I don't agree with that, but that's not my position. If somebody wants to vote for somebody who I don't think should be in, and 75%, which is a very high bar, votes those people in, and I didn't vote for that person, I'm not discouraged by that person, or I'm not against him getting into the Hall of Fame. So really, I'm fine with everybody who's in the Hall of Fame, and I'm also fine with, the fact that there are a lot of people, Dick Allen, Gil Hodges, Santo in the end got in after multiple attempts at doing it. I mean, when you've had like Hodges,
should be in.
Yeah, well, but when you've had
Tony Oliva might
15,
be one.
Yeah, but when you've had 15 years on our ballot, which most of these guys have, and to your point, I mean, Harold Baines was on our ballot for 5 or 6 years, and the most he ever got was 6%. And after 5 years, he went down below 5%, and he didn't last the 15 years that he had on the ballot. So, I think you're on a slippery slope when you start voting people like that into the Hall of Fame. Now, do I have a problem that Harold Baines was voted in? No. Did I ever vote for him? No. But the point of the matter is he got in through some quirk in the system, and that's what they've been trying to do in recent years by stacking these error committees the way they are, because they came up with, using their own analytics, that there are a lot more people in the Hall of Fame from the time of dawn in baseball to 1950 than post-1950. And there are a lot more players playing in the game post-1950 than before. It's why, they had to come up with the Negro League committee to put a bunch of those people in who deserve to go in. And then they basically said, that's it. That's their last bite at the apple. They're never going in. Well, now they're back in on on one of the committees. If they want to put Negro League people back on the ballot, if they want to put Buck onto the ballot, they can put them on the ballot again. But I think there's a point there. Yeah, so I think there's a point though that if you've been on the ballot for 15 years and Hodges has gotten 5 shots at it or something in different veterans committees, really enough is enough already. and an argument to be made that one or two times on a Veterans Committee ballot after, you haven't gotten in on the BBWA ballot, it is good enough. So, I mean, to me, and my suggestion on the whole thing was, let's go to like one committee every other year, which is essentially executives, umpires, open it up to coaches who don't get in, open it up to scouts who have no place in the hall right now. Those should all be on one committee because there's no other way of managers, executives, umpires to get into the hall. They all have to go in through the committee vote. We don't vote for them. They did in the past, but they don't now. When that changed, I'm not sure of the history of the whole thing. It's skewed, and it's changed so many times, and they've changed the voting, requirements, and they've changed who can go on and off the ballot and how you stay on the ballot up to 10 times. So, so we are where we are. And then I think, there's an argument to be made that from 1950 back to the beginning of baseball, everybody who's been in the Hall of Fame should be in, they're in. There's no reason to have votes on any of those people anymore. And the same thing with, the Minosos and Allens and, get them all on the ballot again and give them another shot at it. And if they get in, they get in. And if they don't, that's it. They're done. No more visiting those people again. And everybody out there who has their own people who they always want to get into the Hall of Fame, everybody can have that discussion for time immemorial if they want to do it. But everybody has gotten a fair chance to get into the Hall of Fame.
That's a wonderful idea. Jerry mentioned this is a country of second chances. Had Pete Rose copped to his gambling, his addiction, whatever it was, early on, would have he been in the Hall of Fame today, or is it like anything else, the lie is always worse than the cover? The cover-up is always worse than the crime.
No. I mean, I think that, look, I covered it. Pete was, I wouldn't say Pete was a friend of mine, but I had, like just about everybody who covered him as a player and a manager. I always said as a young reporter covering Pete Rose, if you didn't go onto a field or go into his office and come out with your tape recorder full or your notebook filled, then you didn't belong in the business. That he was that good to talk to, and it wasn't like he said things that were innocuous either. He always gave you good stuff, and he knew he was giving you good stuff. That's how adroit he was at it. But the point of it is that, once he signed that agreement with Giamatti, which gave him the ability to apply for reinstatement every year, a year. It was a 1 year. It was a lifetime suspension with a 1 year codicil, an out clause every year. And once Giamatti died, there was no way any commissioner was going to let him in. And so, Fay Vincent, who was Giamatti's number 2 and became commissioner, he made it plain that he thought Rose helped kill Giamatti, which, obviously nobody knows that to be the case, but that's the position he took, and he was never going to review that application. And when Bud took over, he took the same stance for a long period of time, and it doesn't matter. Pete could have jumped to the highest hilltop, but he did write a book basically saying, midway through Bud's commissionership, saying that, okay, I admitted I did bet on baseball. Then more information came out. Bud made it known that he would, through pressure put on by guys who were on his team from Cincinnati, who are in the Hall, Bench, Morgan, Schmidt, who we played with in the Phillies, Perez, they all went to the commissioner and said, it's about time that we gave, Pete a second look and he should be reinstated in the game and put back in the Hall. So, between Pete and Bud and Bob Dupay was the president of baseball at the time, and this was all around 2002 where you remember they had the 50th anniversary team. It was sponsored by MasterCard. It was announced at the World Series in San Francisco, and that was Pete's coming out party where he was allowed back on a baseball field to represent baseball for the first time. And it got a huge tumult. People loved seeing him, and basically there was a move in the game to reinstate Pete. And so what Bud did at the time was he said, I want a meeting with the Hall of Famers to see, what their thoughts are on this. And if I get a consensus about it from them, then I'll entertain having a meeting with Pete and sitting down and talking to him about it. Well, that never came to pass because a lot of those guys who were alive at the time, Feller, Kiner, they just didn't want to have anything to do with it. And so the way Bud, who never did anything without not even a unanimous consensus, but he wanted everybody on board, he didn't even have the meeting. And then they found out that Pete had welched on, on a house that he was bankrupt on. He didn't pay the bill. They found that he was in Vegas betting on baseball still at the time, and it just dropped off to the point where, they said, okay, we'll go on a case-by-case basis with him, but if the Reds or the Phillies or some team wants to have him, involved, they will have him. They can apply to Major League Baseball on a piece-by-piece basis to see if they can be involved with him with on-field ceremonies. And then it went that way until Bud left and Manfred came in. And Manfred had, he applied for reinstatement. Manfred gave him the hearing that Bud would never give him. Manfred wrote a very good, brief on that hearing. Basically, Pete continued to bet on baseball. He asked him in the hearing whether he bet on baseball. Pete denied that he bet on baseball. He went back and revisited it in the same hearing. Pete then admitted that he bet on baseball. And under those circumstances, Manfred said, we can't reinstate him back in baseball. Again, it will be on a piece-by-piece basis. But, and I've quoted this many times, he also said in the brief that their decision to not reinstate Pete and keep him on the ineligible list in no way affected what the Hall of Fame could do to have them voted into the Hall of Fame. That was a Hall of Fame decision, had nothing to do with Major League Baseball. At that point, I went to Jane and I asked her about it. And she said, well, he's still on baseball's ineligible list. Why are we going to put him on the ballot? And I said, well, the commissioner said A, and then one thing has nothing to do with another. Your board of directors can do whatever they want, according to Manfred. Well, she said, what are we supposed to do? What are we going to do with Shoeless Joe? And I said, why don't we just deal with people who are alive now and not people who weren't even alive when the Hall of Fame was first generated with the first vote in 1936. And she basically refused. They don't want Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame. And so my position on it is at least put him on the ballot, give him his 15 years, not 10, because that's what it was at the time he came, he was suspended. Let him run 15 years on the BBWA ballot and give us the same opportunity to vote him in as we're doing with Bonds and Clemens. And I would say it's probably 50-50 that he'd ever get voted in by the BBWA. And if that happened, and he didn't, then, long after he's gone, the veterans committees wouldn't vote him in either on these 16-person committees, if that's the way they're still doing it, years and years from now, because they changed that over and over again. So that's my stance on Pete. I'd like the opportunity to vote for him. I'm not sure that I would, but I think he should have the opportunity to have his case heard by the baseball writers.
Barry, this is such a great analysis of how the Hall of Fame works, how the board of directors works, how Major League Baseball works, and it's really good insight that you're giving to all the listeners out there. But could we just change gears? I know Ralph wanted to talk about the proposed changes that Manfred put out a couple of weeks ago, and I think your position on the DH in the National League is that it's time for the NL to adopt the DH. Is that correct?
Yeah, and basically, I don't see any reason not to phase it in. It doesn't have to be a sledgehammer over the head where you next year you put it in the National League. The first thing I'd like to see is that in all interleague events, whether it's the World Series or regular season, that we no longer have to watch a pitcher hit in a game against an American League team with a DH. First of all, it's not fair it's less fair to the American League team than it is to the National League team to go into a National League park and have to bat your pitcher who never hits. And I don't want to see it. I haven't wanted to see it for years. This goes back 10 years I've been writing about this, if not longer. When I was still at MLB.com, I wrote about this. And last year in the World Series, when you had to play J.D. Martinez out in right field, and he was questionable out there just to get his bat in there for the Red Sox at Dodger Stadium, it's not fair, and people are paying too much money to see some pitcher who hasn't hit not only in his entire year, but for his entire life, have to hit in a major league game. I mean, that's left the station. That's it. And then, with analytics and longer bullpens, shorter benches, the sacrifice bunt is no more. I mean, moving runners around, to get them from base to base and giving up outs is verboten now in baseball. There's no National League strategy anymore.
A phase baseball's going through. Don't you think when the shift is on for enough times, there are going to be teams or individual players that are going to say, I'm going to hit 400. I'm just going to play Tony Gwynn.
The hitting in baseball has been deteriorating, since I was a kid. I mean, if you were a 270 hitter when I was a kid, you were a lousy hitter. Now, if you're a 270 hitter, you're a top-notch hitter. You have too many hitters. In the National League, what happened to catchers hitting? I mean, such a big deal has been made about Real Muto because he can somewhat hit and catch. And he was such a piece for somebody to pick up in the offseason. He's an anomaly now. Buster Posey, as a 300 hitting catcher, is an anomaly. You have teams like the Diamondbacks. Not only do they have a pitcher batting 115, which is the average for a pitcher in major leagues, but they have a catcher who can't bat 200. They carried 3 catchers last year who couldn't bat 200. So you get to the bottom of the lineup in the National League with the Diamondbacks, and your 8th and 9th hitter, you might as well just not watch him come to the plate. It's a horrible way to watch baseball. It just really is. And finally on it, the National League and the Central League in Japan are the only 2 leagues in the world that don't utilize the DH. It's a train that's left the station and is never going back. It's really that simple. So at some point, we're going to have to move forward. And just like the fans in Houston who cried bloody murder when the Astros had to move to the American League as a condition of the sale of the team, and they basically said they'd never come back. Well, if you ask most Astro fans if they remember that team played in the National League, they wouldn't even remember. And it's the same thing over the course of time with the DH in the National League. People will get used to it, and nobody will even remember, and it'll be better for the game.
And the Houston fans, well, we were on a cruise last year, and we had two folks from Houston. They were wearing their orange T-shirts, world champions. They just loved the Houston Astros being in the American League. So, they got something that they never had. They got to the one World Series, I think, in 2005 at the National League, and they lost. They got swept by the White Sox, and their only World Championship came in the American League. So I think they're quite happy, and they got a pretty good team too now these days.
Right,
different era, but it's really good for the club to be in the American League. And I made the point the other day with Ralph. We were having lunch together, and I said, was Dallas Braden's perfect game and Matt Cain both had perfect games within a couple of years of each other? And I said, I thought that Braden's perfect game was much more difficult to attain than Matt Cain's because of what you said, the bottom of the order. The last two guys are hitting 200 or less, whereas in the American League, Braden had to go out and get a tough hitter for his 27 outs versus Cain's. So your thoughts?
Yeah,
on
you
that?
brought that up. Yeah, you brought that up on Facebook, and I think a perfect game's a perfect game. It's difficult whether you have to face a pitcher in the ninth spot, and so many things have to happen correctly for it to happen, and there's so few of them over the course of baseball history that it's difficult under any circumstances. But certainly, it's more difficult when you're facing a team that has, 9 hitters in the lineup as opposed to 8. And you can go back to, say, David Cohn's perfect game, which came against an Expo team that was completely stripped before, long before it moved to Washington, D.C., but had been stripped after the 94-95 strike, and, were a bottom feeder of the National League. And even with the DH at Yankee Stadium that day, they were no match for David Cohn. But, would David Cohn have had it's all those could you, would you, you can't replace things. And, but that previous Expo team, the 95, probably wouldn't have been that fodder for a perfect game that year for David Cohn either. So, yeah, but I agree with you. Anything you have to do. That's why I argued back to the Hall of Fame for one split second. I argued for Messina into the Hall of Fame and voted for him from the start because, he played his whole career in the American League East. At the time, the American League East was a top-to-bottom division that was very tough to pitch in. He pitched in Baltimore. He pitched for the Yankees. He had a 3.3-something ERA. He won 270 games. That was his entire career, pitching in the toughest parks and in the toughest division in baseball. So what he did was worth more than what, maybe Clayton Kershaw is doing right now, pitching in the NL West.
True.
Yeah, and it's going to come up again in 5 years when CC Sabathia comes on the ballot. He'll probably be up to about, he's got 246 wins. He's going to retire at the end of the year. So he might end up with 260 wins. Would he be a candidate for the Hall of Fame? And probably, in my mind. But
he's a candidate, but if Pettit is not in the Hall of Fame, how are you going to vote for Sabathia?
Exactly. I agree with you. I believe
Pettit had 19 playoff wins.
Yeah.
Played on 5 world championships. Played on a 6th one in Houston. He was an integral part of every team he won with. You can make an argument that, okay, you had Mo, you had Jeter, you had all these guys, but the Yankees wouldn't have won 5 World Series without Pettit. He pitched some incredible playoff games for them. No, I'm not voting for CC Sabathia for the Hall of Fame.
But you would vote
not
for
right,
Pettit.
Not right now.
But
yeah,
you would vote for Pettit.
I did vote for Pettit.
Okay. We cover the A's on this show, and Jerry covers them every day. You're in the press box, Jerry. Would you ask Jerry, for his analysis on the A's, because sometimes I feel local media can't see the forest for the trees. So would you give us an objective viewpoint of what they have going in this year and how you think they'll do?
Yeah, the A's won 97 games last year, Barry, and their starting five, their rotation was in tatters. I think they used 10 different starters during the course of the season. Several of the players had Tommy John surgery, and now entering the season, they lost two position players, Jed Lowry and Jonathan LaCroix. They got Nick Hundley. They signed him as a free agent. I'm not too thrilled about that. And they traded for Jurickson Profar, and he might be okay. But their bullpen was pretty good. They really built a good bullpen because that's part of the way that baseball is going with the analytics. But tell me your thoughts on the rotation. They signed Brett Anderson yesterday to a one-year deal. They got the fella from Toronto, Estrada, and they got Mike Byers. And none of those guys are one or two starter. So, and they won 97. And I'm projecting that they're going to probably, and I hope I'm wrong, I think they're going to be lucky to win 85 this year. But we'll see how it plays out. But how do you see the A's doing this year?
I think that they were an under-the-radar team last year. And when they got going, nobody was really paying too much attention to them. And I think that's an easy way to win a lot of games, especially when you're in a division where, Texas is lousy. Seattle was supposed to do a lot better, and they were right there, right before the All-Star break, and they collapsed. Yep. The Angels were very competitive until Ohtani and their entire pitching staff went down again, and right. The Angels never had a closer. They had 35 collective saves last year. So the A's just went right past everybody, in that division. And then when you stack that up against the fact that the whole the Central is just dreadful. You had like one 500 team in the Central last year, and that was the Indians. And now the Indians have decomposed. Their pitching staff came apart, and they're restructuring. You have a whole division there where, nobody really is competitive. And you have, the Yankees and the Red Sox, which will play each other again for first place on the number one wild card. And that leaves you, again, with the number two wild card if you're in the West, because it just doesn't look like, unless you have a surprise team like 2 years ago with the Twins, unless you have a surprise team in the Central, chances are that team, I don't see either Tampa Bay or the A's doing what they did last year. And also, I don't see them doing it, I think they snuck in with these bullpen games that they were able to use last year, the second half of the season, mostly out of necessity. I don't see that working for the long run over the course of an entire season. So, you have to have at least four decent starters. And you just licked off, what the A's have and what they brought in and what they have coming back. They've got no pitching. So how did they, over the course of an entire season, generate what they did last year, when now they're not below the radar anymore, and other teams are going to come at them differently, scout them differently, pitch to them differently. You have Chapman also coming back from surgeries. He's not going to be ready till opening day. He's one of their key players. You have a very limited player in Chris Davis. And as you say, you lose the second baseman, which was really an important cog for that team. And is so far going to replace him? Who knows? I mean, they brought in Hundley because the other two catchers they have are in the realm of the Arizona catchers. Last year, which was Mathis and Avila and Smith,
backup
who
guys,
essentially couldn't hit.
Guys.
Right, and that's where catching is. That's where the A's catching is. That's where the catching is generally throughout baseball. I mean, what happened to the great catchers when you had, eras when every team had a catcher who could hit and catch? That's pretty incredible to me too.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to see the Yogi Berras and the Roy Campanellas and the Johnny Benches anymore.
Well, go even more forward than that. I mean, you had, Jorge Posada. You had, the Braves always had. They didn't have a great catcher, but they had an Olsen who could catch. You had Rodriguez. You had Piazza. Even up to a couple of years ago. I mean, look, Gary Sanchez can't catch, and he's a below 200 hitter who hits the ball out of the ballpark every once in a while. How long is that going to be sustained? So, I don't see the A's. I'm on the fence on them. I just think that, if you look at the West this year, the Astros are far and away the best team in the division, and they're among the elite in baseball in the American League. And then, number two is wide open. And, the Mariners took a season that they collapsed in, that they were supposed to make a run at, and they totally reconfigured. Texas is still in reconstruction. The A's we just talked about, and the Angels are in a situation that if everything goes right for them, they could be the A's of last year. But a lot of that happens with, whether Ohtani could come back and actually hit, whether, all these guys, Trapino is already, he was set back during the winter, so he's not at full strength. Harvey hurt a quad yesterday. They've had pitching injuries up the yin-yang for 3 years among starting pitching. And the only thing they have now that they didn't have last year is they've got a closer in Cody Allen. And, the A's have the bullpen, but it's just how you get there for them to be able to utilize it. So I think they could be anywhere between an 85 and 95 win team.
There are a couple of guys out there that they could hire, but they might have to spend money. And one is Gio Gonzalez, who pitched for the A's, I think, up to 2011, 2012. He can be a nice lefty come for them. And they could take a chance on Clay Buchholz. I don't think they'd have to spend a lot of money on Buchholz, but they would give him an opportunity to pitch. And he's the kind of reclamation project that the A's like to invest in. He wasn't even a reclamation project. I mean, he pitched really well for the Diamondbacks last year until, again, he got hurt. And, that's the situation with him. How long is his arm and his shoulder going to hold up? Yeah. Because, he can still, when he's out there and he's healthy, I mean, he was amazing. I saw him a number of times last year. I mean, he could really pitch. He was like when Rich Hill came back from all the injuries and reconstructed himself as a starter rather than a reliever. And aside from the finger problems, Hill's shoulder and his elbow has stayed healthy. That's where Buchholz is right now. And sure, you could sign him probably for the minimum and throw him in the minor leagues the way the Diamondbacks did, and let him build up and see how he'll be. But there's a lot of pitchers out there who aren't going to have contracts the way things are going that teams like the A's could pick up. And they will pick them up. Padres and A's, Padres don't have much of a pitching staff right now either. They don't have a veteran starter on their pitching staff right now. It's all kids. They're going to have to pick up somebody too. Yeah, well, Dallas Keuchel's still out there. And
Well,
I don't know why he hasn't been signed either.
Money. They're not going to pay him what he wants. Kimbrel, they're not going to pay him what he wants.
Too. Yeah, Kimbrel might get a 4-year deal. I was thinking that the Red Sox would give him maybe a 3-year deal with a 4th year for a player option. He's going to be 31, and they break down. The pitchers break down between 31 and 36. It's just the way it is. They're not doing PEDs anymore, so they're going to break down like they did in the old days. And Kimbrel has got value to someone, but again, they don't want to pay him the money.
Well, they're not being caught doing PEDs. Maybe it's human growth hormones, this, that, and the other thing. But I'd be hard to convince that there isn't a continuation of enhancement. Would you agree, Barry?
All I'm saying is what I said earlier, that that the testing system doesn't stay ahead of what the players are doing. Between masking and new designer drugs that they're doing, I don't think it's the same old thing. I think there's obviously a chance that people are still being able to get through the system, and you can't test for HGH anyway. I mean, that's a blood test, and it's a very tough test to catch anybody on, even though they do blood testing for it in baseball now. Plus you get doctors that give them regimens on how to do it, when to do it, how to get it out of your system. I think the chances are probably great that there's still some sort of, drug enhancement going on. It's all part of the game. Everybody's trying to beat the system.
Barry and Jerry, you guys know that Sandy Alderson has returned to our A's. Barry, can you enlighten us about something we may not know about Sandy? You followed him basically his entire career. And what is it that you can tell us that would enlighten us about him?
Well, I mean, at this point, as far as Sandy's baseball acumen goes, he's tremendous. I mean, there's nobody in baseball who's worked at the club level, the commissioner's level, and done so many things for Major League Baseball that Sandy's done. But to me, the most important thing, and I was really happy to see him resurface with the A's, is that right now he's healthy because he's been through 2 very serious bouts with cancer that could have killed anybody. So for me, with his expertise and being Billy's mentor, it just brings him back to the place where he started, and it gives him an opportunity to work with these guys as they're going. He'll also help, having been, in Padres with Petco, Citi Field at the time the Mets came over there. It's like he'll be a big help to them as they get into the new ballpark too. There's a lot of different ways that you can use Sandy Alderson. I think it's a great pickup, and I'm really happy for Sandy that he's healthy enough to be able to do it. Hey guys, I've got to go. We're way over the amount of time that I had here as it is.
One final question, Barry, while I have you. What do you think of the idea that we're going to propose on this show to have Charlie Finley in the Hall of Fame? Is he worthy?
I mean, basically, you can propose anything you want, and those things are. It just seems that it took O'Malley how many years to get into the Hall of Fame after he died. It looks like Steinbrenner is probably not going to get in this era while people still know him. I mean, Jacob Ruppert didn't get into the Hall of Fame until a couple of years ago. I think 2012 or 2013 he got into the Hall of Fame. There were guys who didn't know. Ruppert didn't get in. There was a whole coterie of people who couldn't stand Jacob Ruppert back in the day, and that's why he didn't get in the era after he died. I certainly think, Finley, as cantankerous as he was one of the owners at the time who he was on the cutting edge for a lot of things, for promotion, for making the game better. The DH came in under his, tutelage around that time. The colored uniforms, the colored baseballs. He was penurious and had a lot to do with free agency coming into being. He tried to thwart that, and he won 3 championships with that club. I mean, I think he's a Maverick owner. Yeah, he's a Maverick owner, and he was still around when I broke in. It still owned the team when I broke in covering baseball in 1976 and 77. So, I wouldn't be against.
Oh, that means, Barry, you, me, and Jerry, we're geezers, and it's a privilege.
Yeah,
it's a privilege.
Yeah. It's better than the old.
Right, Casey says you could look it up.
Some
people don't reach my age on here anymore. So.
Right, being a geezer is better than the alternative.
Absolutely.
Got that right.
All right. Hey, I'm a fellow geezer, and I'm proud of it. Thank you, guys. This was fun. Barry Bloom, Forbes columnist, Jerry Feidelberg, Pharmacist of the Year in California, 1995, and former A's pharmacist and journalist,
in the 90s.
and a good, all-around good guy, my buddy. Love you guys. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Come back and visit us sooner than later, Barry. Thank you again, Jerry. Good
Thank
show.
You, Ralph.
We'll be back soon. Keep them flying. That's the only thing I can say. Thank you for listening, everybody. Adios.
Bye-bye.
The proceeding was a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. Thank you for listening.